When Elvis Presley walked into his dressing room at NBC Studios on December 3, 1968, 10 minutes before showtime, nobody knew he was about to have a complete breakdown. The biggest comeback in music history was about to be canceled because the king of rock and roll was having a panic attack so severe he couldn't breathe. His hands were shaking, his vision was blurring, and the one question running through his mind was terrifying. What if I'm not Elvis anymore? What if they realize I'm a fraud? But nobody in that hallway knew yet that this wasn't just stage fright. This was a man confronting 7 years of failure, irrelevance, and the crushing fear that his moment had passed forever. December 1968. Elvis Presley hadn't performed live in front of an audience in 7 years. 7 long years of making terrible movies that everybody knew were garbage. 7 years of watching the Beatles and the Rolling Stones take over the music world he'd single-handedly created. 7 years of becoming a joke, a has-been, a relic from the 1950s that nobody took seriously anymore. His last #1 hit was in 1962, 6 years ago. His movies were box office poison, barely making back their budgets. Critics called him washed up, finished, a nostalgia act. Young people called him irrelevant, their parents' music, uncool. And worst of all, deep down in places he didn't want to admit existed, Elvis was starting to believe every word of it. The '68 comeback special was supposed to change everything. NBC had given him a full hour of primetime television, a Christmas special that would reintroduce Elvis Presley to America and hopefully remind people why he'd mattered in the first place. The network executives wanted him to sing Christmas carols in a cozy sweater, safe and nostalgic, and completely unthreatening. They wanted White Christmas and Silent Night, and maybe a few of his old hits performed in a way that wouldn't scare suburban families. They wanted the Elvis their grandmothers could love. But Elvis's director, Steve Binder, had a radically different vision. "We're going to put you in black leather like the rebel you used to be, sit you down with a live audience inches away from you, and let you be Elvis again. Raw, real, dangerous, sexual, the way you were before Hollywood and Colonel Parker turned you into a joke." Elvis had agreed to the concept. It sounded exciting, revolutionary even, when they first discussed it in pre-production meetings. But now, standing in that dressing room with 10 minutes until showtime, with his future hanging in the balance, reality was hitting him like a freight train going full speed. He hadn't performed live since 1961, 7 years ago. 7 years is an eternity in show business. He'd forgotten what it felt like to face a real audience, to feel their energy, to feed off their reactions in real time. What if they hated him? What if they laughed at this pathetic attempt at relevance? What if he proved, once and for all, beyond any shadow of doubt, that Elvis Presley was dead and never coming back? His heart was racing like a jackhammer. His chest felt tight, constricted, like someone was sitting on it. He couldn't catch his breath no matter how hard he tried. The room was spinning, tilting, the walls closing in. This was it. This was a full-blown panic attack, the kind he'd been having more and more frequently over the past year. And nobody could know. Nobody could find out. Because if Elvis Presley admitted he was terrified, if the king showed even a moment of weakness, if anyone saw him like this, vulnerable, scared, human, then it was over. The comeback would be canceled. His career would end in humiliation. He'd spend the rest of his life making beach party movies that nobody watched, and living off nostalgia for a career that ended before he turned 30. Steve Binder knocked on the door. "Elvis? We're 5 minutes out. You ready?" Elvis stared at himself in the mirror, at the black leather suit that made him look like the rebel he used to be, the dangerous kid from Memphis who'd scandalized America with his hips, at the face that looked older now, more tired, more uncertain than it had any right to be at 33. At the eyes that betrayed every single ounce of fear he was desperately trying to hide from everyone around him. At the man who used to be Elvis Presley trying to figure out if he still was? "Yeah," he lied. "I'm ready." But Elvis wasn't ready. Not even close. Not by a mile. Because standing in that dressing room with the sounds of the audience filtering through the walls, Elvis Presley was facing the biggest, most terrifying question of his entire life. Was he still the king? Or was he just a 33-year-old man desperately clinging to a crown that no longer fit, pretending to be someone he used to be, living off memories of glory days that were never coming back? The walk from the dressing room to the stage felt like a death march, like walking to his own execution. Every single step was absolute agony. His legs felt like they were made of lead, heavy and unresponsive. His hands wouldn't stop shaking no matter what he did. He could hear the audience on the other side of the curtain. 400 people packed into a small studio, waiting eagerly to see if Elvis Presley still had it. Waiting to judge him. Waiting to laugh at him if he failed. Waiting to confirm what everyone in America already suspected deep down, that he was finished, washed up, a nostalgia act desperately trying to recapture magic that was gone forever. Steve Binder walked beside him, talking fast, trying desperately to pump him up, to inject some confidence into a man who looked like he was walking to the electric chair. This is your moment, Elvis. This is where you remind the world who you are. You're not some movie star doing Christmas carols for suburban housewives. You're Elvis Presley. You're rock and roll. You invented this whole thing. You created this. Now, go out there and take it back. Show them what they've been missing for 7 years. Elvis nodded mechanically, but he wasn't really listening. All he could hear was the voice in his head. The voice that had been getting progressively louder and more insistent for years now. The voice that whispered poison in his ear every single day. You're not good enough anymore. They've moved on without you. The Beatles are better. The Stones are cooler. Bob Dylan is more meaningful. You're just a nostalgia act now. A punchline to a joke everyone's already heard. A has-been in a leather suit pretending to be dangerous when everyone knows you're just scared. Washed up. Finished. They reached the wings of the stage. Elvis could see the setup now. A small boxing ring in the center of the studio, surrounded by audience members sitting so close he could reach out and touch them. No barrier. No distance. No protection. Just him and them, face to face, eye to eye. Exactly what he'd been avoiding for 7 years. Exactly what terrified him most. Because when you're that close, they can see everything. They can see if you're faking it. They can see if the magic is gone. They can see if Elvis Presley is just a man in a leather suit pretending to be something he's not anymore. 2 minutes, the stage manager called out, his voice cutting through the chaos backstage. Elvis's breathing got faster, shallower, more panicked. The room started to tilt at a crazy angle. Oh God, this is really happening. This is real. I can't do this. I can't go out there. I can't face them. I can't. Elvis. A hand on his shoulder, firm and grounding. Elvis turned to see Scotty Moore, his original guitarist, the guy who'd been with him since the very beginning, since Sun Records in Memphis, since before any of this fame and fortune and pressure meant anything at all. Scotty looked at him with eyes that understood everything, eyes that had seen Elvis at his best and his worst, eyes that knew exactly what he was going through right now. You feeling it? Elvis couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. He just nodded. A quick, jerky movement. Good, Scotty said. And there was warmth in his voice. Understanding. That means you care. That means it matters to you. That means you're not just going through the motions. The day you stop being scared before a performance is the day you stop being great. The fear means you still give a damn. Now get out there and show them what they've been missing for 7 long years. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this night so transformative. Elvis wasn't just fighting stage fright. He was fighting 7 years of self-doubt, career suicide, and the crushing realization that he'd wasted the prime of his life making movies he hated for money he didn't need. 1 minute. This was it. The absolute moment of truth. No more delays. No more excuses. No more time to think or doubt or run away. Elvis closed his eyes and thought about everything that had led him to this terrifying moment. The years of terrible movies that had slowly killed his soul. Clambake, Harum Scarum, Spin Out, Girl Happy. Movies so bad that critics didn't even bother reviewing them anymore, just dismissing them with a sentence or two. Movies that made him a laughingstock among the very generation he'd once inspired. Movies that turned Elvis Presley from a cultural revolutionary who'd changed the face of American music forever into a walking punchline that nobody took seriously. He thought about watching the Beatles perform on The Ed Sullivan Show in February 1964 and feeling his stomach drop as he realized the world had completely moved on without him. About seeing young people on the street who had absolutely no idea who Elvis Presley was, or worse, knew the name, but associated it only with cheesy movies and Christmas albums. About being called old and outdated at 29 years old, when he should have been in his absolute prime. About becoming irrelevant and forgotten while still young, still alive, still breathing. He thought about Colonel Parker, his manager, the man who'd made him rich and famous, but had also slowly destroyed his soul. Parker had turned him into a commodity, a product to be packaged and sold. He'd stopped Elvis from doing what he loved, performing live, connecting with audiences, being dangerous, and locked him into movie contracts that were destroying his spirit one terrible film at a time. Parker had made him wealthy beyond imagination, but had taken away the one thing that made him feel truly alive. His music, his connection to his audience, his reason for existing, and he thought about his mother, Gladys, dead for 10 years now, gone when he needed her most. She'd always told him, with such conviction in her southern drawl, "Be true to yourself, baby. Don't let them change who you are. Don't let the money or the fame turn you into something you're not." He'd broken that promise to her. He'd let Hollywood change him completely. He'd let the money corrupt him. He'd let fear control him. He'd let Colonel Parker mold him into a safe, sanitized, neutered version of the dangerous rebel he'd once been. But tonight, he had one chance to go back. One chance to honor her memory. One chance to be Elvis again. The real Elvis. The Elvis she'd raised. The Elvis who'd changed the world. 30 seconds! The band was already on stage, instruments ready, waiting for him. The audience was buzzing with anticipation, energy, excitement. The cameras were rolling, capturing everything. This was live television, broadcast to millions of homes across America. No do-overs, no second takes, no safety net, no forgiveness for failure. Whatever happened in the next hour would define the rest of his career, the rest of his life. It would either be the greatest comeback in entertainment history or the most humiliating public failure anyone had ever witnessed. Elvis took one last look at himself in a mirror hanging backstage, a final moment of self-assessment. The black leather suit that made him look dangerous again, like the rebel who'd shocked America. The slicked back hair that framed his still handsome face. The eyes that still showed fear, still betrayed doubt, but were trying desperately to hide it behind a mask of confidence. And he made a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice that would change everything. He could walk away right now, fake an illness, cancel the special, protect himself from the very real possibility of public humiliation and professional destruction. Or he could walk out there and find out, once and for all, if Elvis Presley still existed, if the magic was still there, if he could still be the king. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7. Elvis stepped toward the curtain. 6, 5, 4. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. 3, 2, 1. The outer curtain opened, and Elvis Presley walked onto the stage. The applause hit him like a physical force, like a wave crashing over him. 400 people, on their feet instantly, screaming their heads off. Not polite applause, not nostalgic clapping for a has-been. Real, genuine, overwhelming enthusiasm. Raw energy. Pure excitement. They wanted this. They wanted him. They believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And in that moment, standing there taking in their reaction, Elvis felt something he hadn't felt in 7 long years. Hope. Elvis picked up his guitar, something he hadn't done on screen in years, something Hollywood had taken away from him, and sat down on the small stage in the middle of the boxing ring. The audience surrounded him completely, a circle of faces and expectations. He could see their expressions clearly. Young and old, black and white, men and women, teenagers and grandparents, all of them looking at him with something he hadn't seen directed at him in what felt like forever. Respect. Real respect. Not mockery, not pity, not nostalgia for what he used to be, but genuine respect for who he was right now. In this moment, he looked at Scotty, at his old friend who'd been there from the beginning, at DJ Fontana on drums, keeping the rhythm like he always had, at the guys who'd been with him from the beginning, through the rise and the fall, and now, hopefully, the resurrection. And then he looked back at the audience, at the sea of expectant faces, at the cameras broadcasting this moment to millions of homes across America, at the future, uncertain and terrifying, but suddenly, impossibly, filled with potential again. And then everything changed in an instant. Because in that moment, sitting there with his guitar in his hands and 400 people watching his every move, Elvis realized something profound, something that would save his career and define the rest of his life. He wasn't trying to be Elvis Presley anymore. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't acting. He was Elvis Presley. The leather suit wasn't a costume designed to make him look cool. The guitar wasn't a prop for the cameras. This was who he'd always been, who he really was, buried under 7 years of Hollywood garbage and bad decisions and fear. If you're looking for trouble, he started singing, his voice rough and raw and real. You came to the right place. And just like that, Elvis was back. The performance that followed wasn't just a concert. It was a resurrection. Elvis tore through his old hits with a fire nobody had seen from him in years. That's All Right, Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog. But they weren't nostalgia. They weren't oldies. They were dangerous again, sexy again, relevant again. Between songs, he talked to the audience. Not scripted lines, not rehearsed patter, real conversation. He joked about the movies. I've made a lot of movies. Some of them were pretty bad. The audience laughed, and Elvis laughed with them. Self-aware, human, humble. He told stories about the early days, about being poor in Mississippi, about the first time he heard black music and knew that's what he wanted to do, about Colonel Parker trying to turn him into Pat Boone, and how he'd spent 7 years regretting listening. And then came the moment that would define the entire special. The moment when Elvis proved he wasn't just a nostalgia act. The moment when he showed the world he was still relevant, still revolutionary, still dangerous. Steve Binder had written a new song specifically for Elvis, a song called If I Can Dream, a direct response to Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination earlier that year. A song about hope and change and the American dream. A song that was political and personal and everything Elvis's music hadn't been for years. Colonel Parker hated it. Stick to Christmas carols, he'd said. Don't get political. Don't take risks. But Elvis was done listening to the Colonel. Done playing it safe. Done being the Elvis that Hollywood wanted him to be. As the special neared its end, Elvis stood alone on stage in a white suit, a single spotlight on him, and began to sing. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. His voice soared. Powerful. Emotional. Raw. This wasn't the Elvis from the beach movies. This was the Elvis who'd changed music forever. The Elvis who'd broken down barriers. the Elvis who'd given voice to a generation's rebellion. If I can dream of a better land, where all my brothers walk hand in hand. The audience was silent, transfixed. Some were crying. Because this wasn't just a performance. This was a statement, a declaration that Elvis Presley refused to be irrelevant, refused to be safe, refused to be anything other than exactly who he was. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous, not just from the studio audience, but from America. The special would go on to be one of the highest-rated programs of the year. Critics who'd written Elvis off as a has-been called it the greatest comeback in entertainment history. Young people who dismissed him as their parents' music suddenly saw him as cool again. But wait, you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Because what happened backstage after the taping would reveal the true cost of Elvis's comeback and the demon he'd been fighting all along. Elvis walked off stage to a standing ovation. Steve Binder hugged him. The crew applauded. Everyone was celebrating. They'd done it. They'd pulled off the impossible. They'd brought Elvis back from the dead. But Elvis wasn't celebrating. He walked straight to his dressing room, closed the door, and collapsed. The panic attack he'd been fighting all night finally hit full force. He couldn't breathe. His chest hurt. His hands were numb. He thought he was having a heart attack. He thought he was dying. Steve Binder found him on the floor, gasping for air. "Elvis, what's wrong? Should I call a doctor?" Elvis shook his head, unable to speak. He just needed a minute. Just needed to breathe. Just needed to process what he'd just done. After 10 minutes, his breathing slowed. His heart rate came down. He sat up, leaning against the wall, and looked at Steve with tears in his eyes. "I didn't know if I could do it," Elvis said quietly. "I didn't know if I still had it. If they'd still want me. If I was still me." Steve sat down next to him. "You just proved you're still the greatest performer alive. You know that, right?" Elvis wiped his eyes. "I wasted 7 years, Steve. 7 years of my life making garbage. Being someone I wasn't. Letting them turn me into something safe and boring and forgettable. I can't get those years back." "No," Steve agreed. "But you can make sure the next 7 are different. And what you're seeing now is just the beginning." Because the '68 comeback special didn't just revive Elvis's career, it fundamentally changed who he was and how he saw himself. After the special aired to massive ratings and critical acclaim, Elvis made a decision. He was done with movies, done letting Colonel Parker control his career, done being safe. He was going back to what he loved, performing live. In 1969, Elvis returned to Las Vegas and began a residency that would define the last era of his career. He performed hundreds of shows, reinventing his sound for a new generation. He proved that the comeback wasn't a fluke. He was genuinely back. But the demons he'd faced in that dressing room never fully went away. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the fear that he'd lose it all again. Those stayed with him for the rest of his life. And in many ways, they contributed to the prescription drug abuse that would eventually kill him in 1977. The '68 comeback special was Elvis's greatest triumph and his greatest curse. It proved he was still the king. But it also set an impossible standard that he'd spend the rest of his life trying to live up to. Every performance after that had to match the magic of that night. Every show had to prove he was still relevant. And that pressure, that constant need to prove himself, never let him rest. In the years that followed, Elvis would perform thousands of shows. Some were brilliant, some were struggles. Toward the end, as his health deteriorated and the pills took over, some were embarrassing. But he never stopped trying, never stopped performing. Because that night in December 1968 had reminded him who he was. And once you remember who you are, you can never go back to being someone else. Scotty Moore, his guitarist who'd been there that night, would later say, "The '68 special saved Elvis's career, but I think it might have cost him his life." Because after that, he couldn't be anything less than Elvis Presley. And being Elvis Presley 24/7 is exhausting. It's impossible. And I think it killed him. Steve Binder, the director who'd fought to make the special raw and real instead of safe and boring, would say, "That night, Elvis faced his demons and won. But demons don't go away when you beat them once. They come back." And every night for the rest of his life, Elvis had to beat them again. And eventually, he couldn't. The special itself remains one of the most iconic moments in television history. It's been called the greatest live performance ever captured on film. It's been studied by performers trying to understand what makes a great comeback. It's been analyzed by critics trying to explain Elvis's enduring appeal. But for Elvis himself, it was always more than just a great performance. It was the night he almost lost everything. The night he confronted 7 years of failure and fear. The night he had a panic attack so severe he thought he might die. And the night he proved, to himself more than anyone else, that Elvis Presley was still alive. That's the story of the '68 comeback special Crisis. Not just the triumph that everyone saw on TV, but the terror that nobody knew about. The panic attack in the dressing room. The self-doubt that almost canceled the whole thing. The moment when Elvis Presley had to choose between safety and greatness. Between hiding and revealing. Between being a memory and being alive. He chose greatness. He chose revelation. He chose life. And in doing so, he gave the world one of the greatest comebacks in entertainment history. But he also sentenced himself to a life of constant pressure, constant performance, constant need to prove he was still the king. Because once you remind the world you're Elvis Presley, you can never stop being Elvis Presley. And that's a burden no human being was meant to carry alone. Tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where you had to prove yourself or lose everything? What's the hardest comeback you've ever made? Do you think the pressure of fame is worth the glory? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of Elvis Presley, the moments that tested him, and the performances that defined him. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.